right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Wendy Ferron, and I am your facilitator. I'm in Pittsburgh. It's good to have you all join us. It seems like we have a lot of folks in. We are presently at 60, 61. They just keep ting, ting, ting in. So, hello again and welcome. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Handouts, if there are any, for any of the sessions for the Patent Literacy Symposium are housed in Schoology. The session handouts will be available there to you in the time slot, the name of the time slot of your session. This session runs for 75 minutes and it is recorded. The chat feature will be off between participants. You can't talk back and forth to participants, but the chat will come to me. I will field any questions that you have and will throughout in order for you to, I'll organize them and then they'll stop periodically and I will address those questions with our presenters. I would like to ask you if you would keep your video feature off and mute yourself to eliminate any potential distractions during the presentation. So we would love to have you tweet about us and share on social media all of the learning that you are experiencing during this literacy symposium. The hashtag, it's right behind me, the hashtag for this symposium is hashtag PA Lit Symposium 2020. And without anything further, I'm going to ask our presenters to introduce their team.
All right, thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to our story titled The Anatomy of a Mindset Shift. My name is Ernesto Ortiz, Jr., and I'm the proud principal of McDonald Elementary School in the Centennial School District. We are found in Warminster, Pennsylvania. It's about 25 or 30 minutes outside of Northeast Philadelphia, and I'm joined by two of my fabulous teachers, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves.
My name is Regina Garahan, and I am a proud kindergarten teacher, full-day kindergarten teacher at McDonald Elementary. I'm very excited to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Erin Landy. I am an elementary reading specialist at McDonald Elementary School, and I'm also very honored to be here today.
Thank you, ladies. So we wanted to share our story as we have started our journey into the science of reading, and it was a huge undertaking in terms of a mindset shift, a lot of heavy lifting, but like anything else, something worth doing is going to require some heavy lifting. And we want to just start off by sharing, there we go, a little bit about ourselves in terms of our careers. And I am in the third year of the principalship here at McDonald. We are a K-5 building, and I personally have been in the classroom for 13 years in an elementary setting, and this is my 6th year as a building principal, building administrator, 3 years as an assistant, 3 years as a principal. Currently a doctoral student at Delaware Valley University with my research focusing on literacy. And I'm proud to say that I've partnered and collaborated with institutions like AIM, Institute for Learning and Research out of Conshohocken, the Reading League chapter from PA, and Amplify Science. And wanted to just allow Mrs. Garahan to introduce herself.
Okay, so like I said, I am a full-day kindergarten teacher. I've been teaching the past 16 years in the Centennial School District, and I have had various grade levels, but my passion really is the primary grades. My degrees are in elementary ed, a minor in reading from Westchester University, and a master's of ed with special education cert from Arcadia University. And then additionally, I have my master's plus 50 credits, and a lot of those credits based in reading. And I just finished the very first course, Pathways to Proficient Reading, just on Friday. So that was very exciting, and I can't wait to take more courses. And I just have a huge passion for literacy instruction. So I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you.
Hi again, I'm Erin Landy. I've been in the Centennial School District for 13 years, and this will be my 8th year as a reading specialist. I also just finished AIM's Pathway to Proficient Reading course and look forward to continuing our partnership with them as well. And my philosophy of reading education, which really drives everything I do, is that I believe if we give our students the tools they need to succeed, that they will grow into passionate readers and love to read.
That's right. So where did it all begin for all of us? And in terms for me, as the building leader, we are tasked with being the instructional leader of our building. And that's something I take very seriously. And I'm sure these ladies would attest to that. But for me personally, my first step into the science of reading started back in the fall of 2018 with Emily Hanford's first article, Hard Words, Why Aren't Kids Being Taught to Read? And I remember that Saturday vividly, and how I had a lot of questions after reading that article, as I'm sure many people did when they read her work for the first time. And it was something that intrigued me. It wasn't something as the principal I wanted to come in on Monday and start changing everything and flipping everything upside down. It was that was the start that really helped me dig deeper into the science of reading. And we have a number of the samples of books and literature that we read. And I mean, I relied heavily on the Essentials book from Kilpatrick, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. And if this is the first time you're hearing about that, that would be the book I would recommend first. But I know Gina has read The Language at the Speed of Sight. I know Mrs. Landy has the Essentials, and I believe you have the Speech to Print book as well.
Yep.
And so these were just some of the classic books that we used in terms of starting our journey with the science of reading. So from that point on, it just started a year's worth of taking a deep dive, reading the research, looking at the evidence base behind the research to really understand the why in terms of the science of reading. And so when you take that time from 2018 through 2019 and couple that with at the end of the school year, and if for all the Pennsylvania educators here, we are familiar with our state assessments, the PSSA test, and our results came in May, at the end of May. Remember this day very well. When my superintendent called me, it was field day, it was a Friday, it was hot. You get a phone call at dismissal from the superintendent. Oh, on a Friday, that's never good. And so, but it was great, calling us to let us know that our grades 3, 4, 5 results in reading and math were in, and that we had improved across all 6 areas and highest results in the last 5 years. And it was definitely something that we celebrate. And Aaron and Gina will tell you, I'll celebrate any small victory, but this was definitely a big one. Balloon drop and all. Remember that, ladies?
Yeah,
That's what I was going to say, balloon drop.
Yep. And, you know, we were definitely excited to see that the hard work that we were putting in was paying off. And so, like anything else, you look at the data. After we celebrate our success, I'm reflecting on the data over the course of the rest of June, July, and although, you know, we had a successful school year, and there's no minimizing that. I'm looking at my 3rd grade data, and it's staring at me and saying 62.5% of my 3rd grade students are performing at or above proficiency. And remember, I said, these are the highest results we've had in the last 5 years. And it just was like, that still means if I were to line up 10 students, 4 out of 10 of them are most likely going to be performing below proficiency in terms of reading. And that just didn't sit well with me. Who out of those 10, which 4 is it going to be? And also looking at the data in terms of the reading success wasn't sustained going to 4th grade and then going into 5th grade. So something had to give. What could we do differently so that we can improve upon that? Because if we simply did what we were doing, we might simply be plateauing. So the conversation started for us in terms of our lens, looking through the lens differently. And I have over here, many of you might be familiar with the MSV part of the 3 queuing system. Maybe you don't know 3 queuing as the name, but you definitely are familiar with the strategies of 3Qing in terms of a student relying on meaning or semantics or the syntactic structure of a sentence or the visualization of the word to help decode a word. Or perhaps you're very familiar with what I call the animal strategies, Chunky Monkey, Flippy Dolphin, and my favorite, Lips the Fish, in terms of helping a student decode a word and relying on strategies, and I say that with quotes if you can't see me, strategies, instead of relying on frameworks that are a lot more detailed and research informed on how reading comprehension works. And so it was a lens change from what we were doing to what I was learning through my research and what I wanted to bring back to the building.
And Ernie, if I can just interject there,
Yep.
I think this was really the point that our building really had an aha moment when you started sharing this type of research and these types of discrepancies and perhaps what some of us had been doing. This was the start of our aha.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely. And, you know, I'll share that at that meeting when I first mentioned the simple view of reading, it's definitely something I remember seeing a couple of quizzical looks, expressions, and you know, for me, I was entering my 19th year as an educator, and that was the first time I had heard of the simple view of reading, or the 18th year, and this was the 19th year that I was actually bringing it to the building after having researched it extensively, so that we can make this mindset shift. So we took a deeper dive into it as a faculty, and we really started talking about literacy instruction, which aligned with these research-informed frameworks. Understanding how reading comprehension through the lens of the simple view is the product of two factors, a student's ability to decode and their language comprehension. And I vividly remember talking about the mathematical equation. If there's a deficiency in decoding or language comprehension, then it increases the likelihood that there will be a deficiency in reading comprehension if we don't have a solid score of 1 for decoding and a 1 for language comprehension. And especially if we're missing either one of these two, if it's a 0 in this mathematical equation, as we all know, when you multiply anything by 0, the answer is going to be 0. So we spoke about the simple view of reading, had dialogue, and I caution teachers, just because it's the simple view of reading doesn't make it easy. And then that's where I feel Hollis Scarborough's reading rope really ties in beautifully with the simple view of reading and the multiple strands. And we definitely dissected that a lot throughout the year. And I know Aaron and Gina are definitely well versed in the strands, having gone through the pathways of proficiency, but understanding the parts that are considered automatic, the parts that are considered strategic, and what we do to go about addressing those areas that possibly might need to be addressed when we're noting some level of reading difficulty in a student. So Wendy, at this point, I'm going to stop to see if there are any questions before we continue.
At present, I don't have any in the chat room because I actually haven't prompted any, so I apologize for that.
Oh.
Folks, if you would like to, you can continue, and I will collect them in the chat. So folks, feel free to type them in.
So in terms of the research and bringing it to the building, and if there are any administrators out there, my suggestion to you as a building leader, simple view of reading is an excellent place to start. Wouldn't you agree, ladies?
Absolutely.
That's an excellent place to start the conversation in terms of relying on research-informed frameworks as these two to really impact your literacy change in your building. And Mrs. Landy, I think this is for you.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into where we really began. Ernie started sharing some of the articles that he found interesting or that might have created a mind shift for him. And that kind of forced us as educators to look at what we were doing at the present time, honoring where we were, because I think Gina had said while we were preparing this presentation, there's no educator that you're ever going to encounter that says, I want to do a bad job or I want to do wrong by my students. We're all in this to teach our students in the best ways possible. So honoring where we are, where we had come as educators, but also accepting and embracing this potential change that was coming to our building. And we knew it was coming because our leader was so passionate about it. So I was both shifting as a mom of a kindergarten student, but also as a reading specialist who had some tools in my toolbox that now I was questioning whether or not they were effective or not for our readers, and deciding how to move forward in the most productive way. So our mentality shift, this collective shift, was certainly our first step, and it was a baby step, and we all took the step in different strides and at different times and with different confidence in ourselves. So that first step, that first hurdle is what we got over. And I think the reason we were able to do that is because we had built this trust in our leadership. Ernie had come to our building as a new administrator. He didn't know us, we didn't know him. He took the time to meet with each of us one-on-one. And in those first 2 years, he really determined that what we needed to increase was our morale and our community involvement. And that's what he worked on. So when year 3 came and he had this new passion and this new information and all of these research findings to back what he was saying, he had the trust in his teachers, and we were going to take this step almost a little bit blindly because we hadn't been as well versed in the research as he had been. So that was really our second step in shifting our mentality, was having trust in him and our assistant principal to guide us in the right direction. And again, I think you will find no administrator will ever say, I want to do wrong by my students, or my teachers. So we certainly knew that he was interested in taking us in the right direction.
And to add to that, Erin, you are absolutely correct. Nobody wants to be doing the wrong thing. However, I remember that first day after the balloon drop, and he's introducing all of these new terms, a simple view of reading. And then he talks about those picture cues, not using those animal strategies. I thought to myself, they are in my classroom right now behind my small group table. This is something that I've relied on and I thought was successful. So it really made me question there. I was like, I'm not sure, about this. And I've always felt, reading is my strong, teaching reading is a strong suit of mine. And it made me question everything. I remember meeting with him later saying, I'm in 80%, but I'm not sure. So, but trusting in him, and I just wanted to learn more. And I'm just so glad that he took us along this voyage, because there were so many discoveries that I made that have made me such a better reading teacher. So.
And that's such a good point, Gina. I think a lot of people were kind of at that 80-20 spot, maybe a different balance actually. But we just decided as a building, and I'm going to give McDonald Elementary School teachers a little plug here. When we do something, we do it 100%. And decided in that moment that we were going to go at this 100% with our leader. So that brought us to our third step. It was our motivation to take action for our students. We are always fully invested in doing what's best for them and moving them forward as children and students and learners and readers. And that's really where we started. It was a mentality shift that completely came together when we began to realize we're doing this for our kiddos, and that's the most important thing. So let's go. We're going to rip down those posters with Flippy the fish on it, and we're going to take down our word walls and put up sound walls in place of them, and we're going to do it 100% because that's what we believe in.
Now, I will add, through the lens of leadership, it was, and ladies, thank you for the kind words and the perspective. It was a no blame, no shame zone. And we, like you said with the first bullet, Erin, honoring where we are, and obviously we're honoring where we have come now, but where we were back then, as I mentioned, I taught for 13 years in the elementary setting. I taught third grade for 8 years. My favorite year was when I taught kindergarten. And I remember using those animal strategies, giving the advice to my children, look at that first letter. Look at the picture, guess the word, what would make sense here, and instead of relying on the orthography of the word. And so honoring where I was coming from prior to me learning the research and sharing that vulnerability with my teachers to say, hey, I get it, I was there, but like the saying goes, when we know better, we do better. And I know it might sound cliche, but I would believe that Gina, Erin, and the rest of the faculty at McDonald Elementary School would agree that we are doing better because now we know better. And we understand why, Lips the fish although it might seem like a logical strategy, how that can hinder reading progress, and how Flippy Dolphin, it makes sense. There's two vowel sounds. It's either the short or the long, but in the long term, when the vowel sounds become more complicated as students go across the grade levels, how that becomes an inferior strategy to how to decode a word. And ultimately, it was a mindset shift. That was one of the first ones in terms of what can we do instructionally prior to talking about other systemic changes that we can do. So I just want to thank you ladies for that, but also for the building administrators out there. It's a matter of honoring the room before attempting to make the shift. And it's never a blame or a shaming. It's more of like what Aaron, you said, aha.
Yeah.
Can we agree?
And
Yeah.
it was
I have a question that came in. Are you ready?
Questions.
This is a good one too. This person would like to hear how you were able to persuade those who may be resistant. And if you didn't have those who were resistant, what offerings might you give for approaching people who really are resistant and not letting go of Flippy the Dolphin?
I would love to answer that.
By all means.
From an outsider's perspective, I believe that, like Ernie said, there was no blame, no shame. We didn't feel like we had to leave everything behind. We knew and honored and respected what we had, and a lot of that came with us in this step forward. But I just feel that the momentum was so powerful that even those who might have been questioning moving forward with this group of people that had obviously decided to do so, that momentum was the motivating factor. Now, I don't know if Ernie had any conversations behind the scenes that I wasn't privy to, but that was just kind of my interpretation of how it happened. The majority of people were moving forward in such a positive and energetic way that even if someone was feeling a little apprehensive, they just kind of jumped on board because it was almost like you didn't want to miss out.
Right. And also to add to that, Ernie also would provide us articles, and he'd always say this is optional. Like, he never said you have to read this, we're discussing this at the next grade level meeting. But any type of new articles he'd come across, he'd share that with us. Any opportunities. There was a at St. Joe's University, there was a conference, a reading conference hosted by the Reading League, and he put it out there to us, anyone interested to go. And there was a good number of people and I was really interested. I wanted to learn more about it. I understood the why, and I wanted to start to know the how to implement this. But I think he gave us lots of opportunities to really do our own research, not just trust in him. And although we had that trust, it was more to do our own reading and start discovering so many things. Just a lot of the articles I started reading made me realize why maybe those old strategies weren't the most effective. So it wasn't just hearing someone say it. It was, he provided us with the tools to kind of make our own aha moments, if that makes sense.
And I like to add, there were definitely conversations one-on-one with, whenever you're working on change, we're all familiar with the bell curve, and you have your early adopters, and as a leader, you identify who those people are because they're going to help you with the shift that you're attempting to make. And I will say Aaron and Gina are definitely the early adopters in this movement and in our shift with our literacy landscape here at McDonald. And then you have what I think Aaron was alluding to, the early majority, who are kind of like, okay, I see the early adopters and I see this wave happening, and I want to jump on before it gets too late. And then for me, for the early majority, it was just a matter of having it where the early adopters were crushing in all capital letters. It's important. And then the late majority, that's when you identify the people who might need some one-on-one time, maybe two-on-one time. And in terms of sharing the research, it was never, here's a 25-page research article, let me know what you think. If you recall, Aaron and Gina, I would provide cliff notes.
Yep.
And say, if you want to read this, great. If you don't have time, which really, I mean, who has time? I said, these 3 or 4 pages and these particular paragraphs would be the meat and potatoes of the article. And I would really appreciate any and all feedback. And as a leader, I know it requires a little bit more on our part, but when we can make it as if it's as meaningful to us as it seems, and this reading stuff is very passionate for me and meaningful for me, then we need to make it as readily available and as easy and as accessible for our teachers to get to. Because one of the challenges with research is how it translates into the classroom. But one of the biggest challenges is that it could be so dry. And so I don't want my teachers reading the first 2 pages and being like, oh my goodness, what is this about? And it's automatic a barrier. So that was another way that I worked on addressing it with the teachers who might have been considered the late majority. Another tip I came across from one of my colleagues that I've connected through Twitter is I would leave articles at the photocopy machine by accident. And, hopefully the teachers would see it, and a couple of them did. And so also, for fun, for the early adopters, I would say, hey, Jean's Day for anyone who can, connect some of the research with a colleague that perhaps is not needs a little bit more convincing. Because there's something very powerful when it's your colleagues, not just simply the person who has the formal role of leadership, getting you to see through the lens that we're shifting to. So I'm hopeful that does answer the question as a collective group from us 3, but there's different layers to the different parts of the faculty. And then ultimately, the 4th part of the bell curve, you just have your late adopters who will just, unfortunately, they're just going to have, that's when the leader has to be more of like, this is the expectation moving forward. And then those are the crucial conversations that you're hopeful that your culture that you establish in your building, you don't have to have, because they understand that the passion's there, the meaning's there, and we're all doing this because we have the best interests of the boys and girls in mind. So Wendy, I'm hopeful that answered the question.
And one last piece I think we're leaving out is that Ernie got the resources into our hands. We had some Hagerty books laying around that the reading specialists were using, but then Ernie made it so that every K-2 teacher, including our EL teachers and our LS teachers, had this book, this tool in their hands in order to teach phonemic awareness in a way that he believed in. And then the foundations manuals came, and we're still working on that because it's a little bit more expensive, but they continue to come in. So when you have the resources in your hand and the ability then to use them, and now you're building teacher capacity so that they have the knowledge to want to use them, then those things obviously motivate the masses as well.
All right. So Wendy, anything else?
Sorry, I have to find my little get to the unmute. No, everything looks great. The person who offered that question said fantastic answers and ideas. Thank you.
Thank you. Especially leave articles at the printer.
Yeah, that's nice.
I reposted that. Yes.
The win. I'm telling you, it works. And Jean Days.
Yes, we'll do anything for a Jean Day.
Yeah.
All right. So, as we continue the conversations, especially with the early adopters and then the early majority, we were really focusing on, and Aaron was foreshadowing there in terms of the importance of oral language and the oral language development with our boys and girls. Understanding how listening and speaking played a part, and how our brains are wired for that. And I also, wherever I reference, there's a couple of reference pages at the end of the slide deck. Our brains are wired to speak, and having those conversations, and then understanding that the written language, reading and writing, it's not a natural process. And for most students, it requires direct and explicit instruction, because what ends up happening, I believe, and I admit I most likely fell victim to this, is that we see some boys and girls where they don't require explicit instruction. It's implicit for them in terms of how their ability to crack the phonetic code, master segmenting and blending, and have some phonemic proficiency that it seems like it is. Reading and writing is a natural process, but understanding how the brain works and how we leverage oral language as the foundation to future reading and writing success, that was another, I believe, aha moment, and strengthened the rationale and the idea as to why we needed to really rely on resources to provide that foundation of oral language proficiency for our boys and girls. And Aaron and Gina, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything else to this part of the presentation.
I think we'll definitely go into more of this when
Yep.
it's the instruction piece. Yep.
So one of the biggest things was understanding what explicit and systematic mean. And you might hear those terms often, but I just want to be sure that everyone understands what they mean. And explicit instruction is when we, as educators, the teacher in the classroom, and I get in there and I'm teaching as well. So, I like to consider myself an educator, not just a principal, in terms of we're providing clear and precise instruction. And looking at what we were doing previous to this year, I know Gina would agree, and I know Aaron would agree, and most of the teachers here at McDonald, if not all of them, would agree that they're looking at it through the lens of our phonics instruction. It was not explicit. It was on an as-needed basis. Perhaps some of it was explicit, other parts were not. As needed, fragmented at best, and it definitely was not as systematic as it could have been. Really and truly following a specific plan and sequence that introduces all the different types of the phonic concepts that there are. And I take this next piece away from our pathways to proficiency, because just like our teachers, I went through the platform, and although I'm not as far through as Aaron and Gina, I do want to walk the walk and talk the talk. I talk the talk, I walk the walk with my teachers. If I ask them or motivate them, ideally motivate them to go through something, I want to experience it with them. And part of the explicit teaching of language system is the core principle of effective literacy instruction for both skilled and emerging readers. And one of the conversation points was, well, what about the boys and girls who are very good at reading? Aren't they going to be bored with explicit instruction and systematic? Well, it depends. Are we making it as engaging as it could possibly be? And do they have all the gaps filled? Having conversations with our grade level leaders, the answer was no. They had gaps. All the gaps were not filled, and we were able to identify those gaps through a systematic and explicit approach. So with that being said, we're looking at the different language systems and understanding the importance of phonology, the huge importance of orthography, and not just simply understanding the alphabetic principle and that letters connect and make sounds, understanding decoding and spelling, and how spelling helps us understand a student's ability to read, but also truly understanding the phonological core and how critical that is. And then as we transition up into the intermediate grades, because this has been, I feel like, more of a primary focus, the conversation continues for us as we add the morphological awareness piece, and then semantics and syntax, especially in writing, and then the discourse piece with use of dialogue and how that impacts all 6 areas impact students' ability to be proficient readers. And we're looking at all of the different areas and how they go into the continuum of K to 5, and how we peel back the layers when we expect any level of deficiency. So Wendy, I'm gonna just take a pause and see if there's any questions.
So far, we're all just with bated breath listening to everything.
Oh. Okay, thank you for that, Wendy.
Really remarkable. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And so and if you remember at the beginning of the school year, Gina and we were meeting as grade level teams and the primary team, especially the K to 2 band, we wanted to be more explicit and systematic, because we decided as a school, if you remember at the end of the 2019 year, our PSSA scores, the highest they were in 5 years. Yes, balloon drop and everything. It was awesome. I mean, we were happy. It was great. And then when you take the time to reflect and look at the data and you look at it with a critical eye, 3rd graders, 62.5% of them are proficient in, or above. And that means almost 4 out of 10 are not. How does that sit well with me? Well, it doesn't. So then we start looking at what can we do? What can we build upon to really address that? Well, you have to start in K1-2. We agreed. as a school, we agreed impacting change in 3, 4, 5, you need to look at your systems in place in K1, 2. You can't throw Band-Aids on 3, 4, 5. You can't throw a bunch of support in 3 and hope it sticks. To truly impact systemic change, you have to focus on your K1, 2 area. And this is where, Aaron, you were alluding to earlier. We made aligned our resources. You know, as a building leader, you have the ability to align your resources with the funding that you have at the building level, your professional development time. Those are all precious resources, and your human resources that you have at your disposal at the building to help support the phonological core with Hegarty, foundations with phonics. And that's just the resource piece. Then we were talking about, what does instruction look like? The orthography of the word, because remember the animal strategies. Oh, lips the fish and flippy dolphin. When we rely on strategies like that, we take away from the orthography of the word instead of relying on having those letters imprinted into our word bank, so to speak. We're relying on strategies that take our attention away from that and cause us to really rely on things that strategies that hinder our development for reading. So understanding the importance of orthographic mappings, connecting the phonemes to the graphemes, leveraging people like our speech pathologist, and who's an untapped resource, but also understanding semantics, syntax, and pragmatics between the relationships of words and sentences. We were looking to address this as a school. It was something that when we met with the team leaders, Gina being one of them from kindergarten, we had a first and second grade representation. Our reading specialists were there along the way. And Aaron, you were part of that conversation as well. So we decided this is the first step in our process to really impact systemic change. And I'm going to defer to Gina for the next, and Aaron for the next few slides from the teacher lens to provide the perspective from the practitioner viewpoint on all these systemic changes that we were making.
Okay, so I have a primary lens here. So in the classroom, one of the things we realized, and I really feel we have such great primary teachers, and I think we all used phonics in our classroom. We all knew the importance of fluency, instruction, comprehension, but we were missing some links. In the past, our district may have been more of a program. We would look at whatever program we were using and just follow the scope and sequence of that program, not really dissecting each component and thinking, is this what is best for our students? So one of the things that I realized after having a mindset shift of my own, after my reflection, we were missing some very important links. And the phonological awareness piece was one of them. In a program that we were using in our district, it may have taught one skill under that phonological awareness umbrella that we would focus on a week or two and just do a few minutes and move on. And I really didn't realize the importance of phonological awareness until this kind of awakening in myself. So now having a different resource and recognizing that that program, although there are aspects that are good in it, it didn't have a strong enough component. So let's outsource and let's use another resource that is much better, that follows the science. So Hegarty is that for us. And it's scripted. I mean, you do have to do some level of planning to make sure you understand the hand motions and all of the steps involved. However, it's right there for you. The examples are there, and it takes you through the continuum of phonological awareness, starting at the word level all the way to the individual phoneme level every day, starting kindergarten, and we use it up to second grade. And I have seen such a huge difference in my students, just their ability to manipulate these phonemes. I mean, their sound deletions, things that I wouldn't even have covered in kindergarten before, following maybe our traditional program, what they're able to do. And then we looked at our phonics instruction, and the program we were using had phonics, of course, as a part of it. But one thing that I used to do and found very important was I would teach small group every day. So I would divide and make sure I had an hour set aside in my reading block for small groups. And I would use formative assessments, homogeneously group my students, and that's where I would provide the bulk of my phonics instruction. What I realized I was lacking was that whole group piece. because I would notice that sometimes in kindergarten, we had students coming to us already as readers. My 2 children at home were one of those students. And now knowing they are sight word readers, you know, they just picked up some of these things, like Ernie said, implicitly and not explicitly, but it doesn't mean they shouldn't be a part of that whole group instruction. And what we found is I would kind of take where they were and I would teach explicit phonics instruction, but maybe I would move through the continuum a little bit faster than I should have. I didn't dig deep enough into the encoding piece that matches it so well, that spelling piece. Or maybe I didn't spend as much time to make sure that they were as fluent decoding those words to really make them become sight. And we'll talk about the difference between sight words later. But it was just an aha moment. I realized talking to first grade teachers, students who were ending on a guided reading level of H, and that seemed so above in kindergarten, maybe went to first grade, but still couldn't dissect a multisyllabic word because they didn't have those skills. So now we've changed our program, and I did see a question. The Heggerty piece is whole group as well. So that's whole group instruction for 10 to 15 minutes. And then the phonics instruction is 20 to 30 minutes whole group. So we had to do some changing of our schedules to make all of this work. Yep. But then I also still find that small group piece extremely important. And that's where I will take a look using my different formative assessments, and then I will reinforce. So I may redo Heggerty. I may go back a few weeks if kids haven't mastered what they needed to. Same thing with foundation skills. If they weren't good with letter sounds, that's what we work on. But the kids who seem to master it, then that's where I would take them along and follow the continuum at maybe a slightly higher pace for their needs. So I think we can move on to the next one.
And I just want to add, in terms, you bring up a great point, Gina, that I honestly forgot because it feels like a lifetime ago when we had these conversations. The schedule change, we did that as a team.
Yes, we did.
After we discussed what we were looking to align and really bring into the fold in terms of whole group and everyday instruction, we looked at our schedule and said, okay, where are we going to dedicate and find the time? So where you see the 10, 15, 20, 30, we were looking through the lessons and the scope and sequence of each and finding what days would be more 10 minutes and what days for Heggerty would be more 10 minutes, what days for foundations might be only 20 because it's more of a review of concepts and not new learning. But carving that time out and dedicating that time was what was key. And as a team, as a building, that was a decision made together, which I believe then helps with, you're listening to the teachers. They have an important voice in the success, if not a crucial voice, in the success of this shift. So I am glad you brought that up because honestly, it's something I've forgotten, but for the building leaders that are out there, that's something that's critical. Absolutely having their voice and part of that decision making. And it wasn't a top down, like this is what we're doing. We had dialogue. There was some disagreement, I remember. And we would think about it, digest it, and come back to it like any other decision-making process. So I just wanted to mention that.
One question for you. What type of training is required for Heggerty, or what type of professional development, not just on the program itself, but on phonological awareness, have you participated in?
Gina,
you want to take that?
Sure. So to be honest, we, for Heggerty, there wasn't a lot of training. It was a resource that our reading specialists have used for years. And
they provided the training.
Right.
We didn't go to a professional, a reading specialist provided the training to the teachers.
Right.
And honestly, that training was as simple as teaching how to navigate the resource, because I will say the Heggerty books, they really guide you through the process. And as teachers came to use them more, they would start to say things like, my kids are so strong with rhyming, I think I'm going to go from 10 examples to 5 examples. And they would just kind of make those best practices decisions on their own. So while the reading specialist certainly supported the teachers in getting started, this resource looks different in our setting. So the teachers came to know the resource and then kind of made it work in their setting with some recommendations from us.
And in terms of, if you heard the term job embedded professional development, what our assistant principal, Mike Van Buren, and I what we would do is, it was a heavy focus on, okay, we're going to come in. It's not in an evaluative, it's in a coaching role, right? And I know teachers, they kind of, you know, and I would like to think that we try to create, Mike and I, an environment that is safe and welcoming. But whenever we step in the room, people get tense. What are you going to do? It happens. But we made it a point to be very clear that when we're coming in, especially in the K-1-2 setting, it was, okay, we're going to just observe what we see. We came back with what the data was. I'll give you an excellent example was the hand motions. We had some inconsistencies with the hand motions throughout the classrooms. And I'll specifically point out kindergarten. So we bring that back to the table. We meet with Gina, the reading specialist, and we provide some level of, with the reading specialist support, professional development on the hand motions so that we can have consistency in all the classrooms. And then that will continue through the grades. So in terms of professional development, the reading specialists were definitely leading the charge, providing support with the teachers, going in and modeling. You were modeling to help with the teachers who had a number of questions. We relied on online resources, which there is always a plethora of resources online that we can reference. And so that is how we went about addressing the professional learning for Haggerty.
And Haggerty has some really wonderful videos that our elementary literacy coach had sent out to the district that are quick, simple, and just kind of remind you of the hand motions. But like, if I'm being completely honest, in some of the videos we've done during this whole distance learning, I mess up on the hand motions and just apologize to the kids and say, I'll do better next time.
Or like when it comes to the way you're holding your hand. So if you want to see the beginning, you have to use your left and right, like some of those.
Yeah, just keep getting used to
those small things. But yeah, you get used to that. And I think also the videos are great out there. And like I said, a lot of us we had a basic in-house training, but then it really took diving in and doing it. So it was nice, you know, although yes, when the walkthroughs happened, you're thinking, oh gosh, am I doing this right? Or, oh no, I was different. Oh, this is how I did it. How do you do it? But it made us have those conversations so we could get better at our craft, so we could get better. But I feel like anytime you're starting something new, you have to just realize you're not going to be perfect and you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay.
And the expectation was clear. So through the leadership lens, you look at it as you need to provide clear expectations to the teachers. And I recall a second grade team meeting we had, and specifically about foundations, because foundations was, as Gina was mentioning in the previous slide, was another piece that we really had to provide some professional development in terms of how does that look. And we provide clear expectations. Over the next 3 to 4 weeks, the expectation is that you get comfortable with the program. Get comfortable with the program because the nuances of teaching phonics is challenging. And it just like the Haggerty and the hand motions, you might slip up. And when we're there, we're not saying, we got you. It's never an I got you. It should never be an I got you in terms of coaching and supporting teachers, and especially when it's something new, or new or old, regardless, it should never be an I got you. And it's always I'm here to help you. I'm here to walk alongside you. And that's what we foster here, the leaders. And it's not just people with the title of a leadership, formal leadership. It's the leaders that, like Aaron and Gina and everyone else involved in terms of this literacy shift that we're making. So you make that clear. And then at some point, you kind of have to have that expectation. Now, it's been 4 weeks. For the next couple, these are the expectations now. And you provide that timeline so that when we do come in, it's very clear to the teachers. So just wanted to add that piece. And Gina, you're going to discuss, this is one of my favorites.
Okay.
It's here.
So another shift that we had to make was really analyzing our sight words and understanding what sight words really are. And I know that I was using that term incorrectly previous to this new learning. Basically, a sight word is any word that we have orthographically mapped in our brains. It's a word that we just recognize by sight. We know it. We can read that word fluently. And yes, that is the goal of our high frequency words and why we teach them to students in kindergarten, first and second. So we still are teaching the high frequency words, but what we learned was we need to still be connecting these words to those phonics and to that grapheme phoneme correlation. So for example, we use something called heart words, and it was in an article we read. You look at the word said, and said is an irregular word. So some of our high frequency words actually do follow phonics rules. It just might be a phonics rule, for example, that a young student in kindergarten has not experienced yet, but you want them to know that word. So for example, like might be a high frequency word, even though it follows that syllable pattern of the CBC. But we want them to have it to be able to read a simple sentence in a decodable reader, like I like blank, right? So that is not necessarily an irregular word, but said is. So the word said, we would teach them that, oh, but the word said is irregular, but it still begins with the s sound. So it has the letter S at the beginning. It still ends with the D sound, and it has the letter D. So what part of this word do we need to know by heart? We need to know that AI in this word does not follow the normal rules we know for AI. So we need to recognize that we need to know this part by heart, and it makes the eh sound. And so teaching the students this way was really it was just so much better than our old approach where we would show the sight word, kind of say memorize it. Now I know the teachers in our building K-2, we always did fun little activities with our sight words every day. Maybe we did like flashlight words or cheering our sight words, hopscotch. So we always tried to get the multi-sensory piece, but this was the missing link, really matching it to its orthography. So it really helps the students understand. And then another change was the word wall. So in the past, we would have our sight words, you know, and I do a sight word train where I get the kids, and on Monday we go on our sight word train and we put it up on our word wall. So we changed that to a sound wall. And at first, I know this was something I was, you know, the kindergarten teachers, we all came together, we're like, okay, well, what does he mean by a sound wall? Okay, so so we changed it from just having the letter A stand for apple, because we obviously know that the vowel has a short and long sound. So we had 2 examples of that. We also had examples of the digraphs, because a word like then, you don't want them to look under the T sound. It's not the same. The number 1 was one of our sight words, right? The number 1 word, it begins with the W sound. So we put that under the W. So it definitely took a shift in thinking. And some of you are probably like, what? That doesn't make sense. But when a student is looking, if they're using that in their writing and they're trying to write 1, they're not going to think to look at O, because they know O is O or Ah. So it was just a shift there in changing the students' perspective on how to find words in our classroom to assist them. So yes, the heart words is something, and I have to say my team members, I feel like I'm on the team with the most amazing kindergarten teachers. We would work together because it was something that we're like, okay, let's look at this week's high frequency words. How are we going to mark these words? Foundations has a way that we would mark them. So some of the words, it was nice and easy. We followed the foundations knowing that the students are going to see that K-2. But other words, maybe we weren't sure. So we would kind of work together. We would mark it our own way, and then we hang our words on the door as the way of the students. Every time they leave our classroom, they read those words on the door. Every time they come back, but the words were marked so they would understand the phonics piece to it. Ernie, do you have anything to add, or Erin, to our heart words?
No, I thought you did an excellent job explaining that, and just understanding the difference between sight words, high frequency words, irregular words, and because those terms are used interchangeably, but understanding the differences then impacted your instruction.
Right.
And the common theme that I hope many people who are listening right now and are picking up on this, the heart words came about from an article that Ernie had sent us. And then the sound walls, Ernie, I'm pretty sure you sent us a few examples of those that we could just print out and laminate. So nothing came just with like I want to see a sound wall in your room, go figure it out. It was, here's some support if you want it. If not, feel free to share some resources that you have found.
Yep.
Okay, so moving on. So another piece is that fluency piece. I feel like in kindergarten, people don't usually think about really honing in on fluency until the students are reading sentences. I feel like that's something that happens more towards the end of kindergarten or not until first grade. And so one of the things by taking AIM, the course through AIM, I realized that really fluency starts at the beginning at the phoneme level, and practicing and even having those timed drills of those initial sounds and moving on to the graphing, having them practice those letter names. And there's all different fun ways to do it. I used to make it part of my morning meeting. We would time ourselves for a minute and see how far we could go, and we'd stop and say, tomorrow our goal is to get one more sound or one more letter. And then once the students became good decoders of CVC, we would practice a mix of nonsense words and real words and have them practice. And I would sometimes, as like a small group, I'd hand them all different sheets of different forms and say, my goal is for you to get better where you left off. So they weren't comparing themselves to the student next to them. They were comparing themselves to themselves, like, oh, yesterday I stopped at 8 words, but tomorrow my goal is 9. So just always increasing that fluency. And then moving on to the sentence level as well. We also used a lot of different fluency tables. We found some resources that had movements involved. So I would show that. So sometimes we'd have our high frequency words mixed in there, where it would be like said, I, like, and clap your hands and things like that. But we would do the letters, the sounds that way. So just practicing fluency at a different level. It doesn't always have to be sentence level is where you start. And then really is the next piece is the connected text. And we really relied a lot on decodable readers. So this is just an example of decodable readers that we use this year, which became a blessing for our distance learning. We'll talk about that because these could be printed, or there was a digital version of color that the parents could just put up on the screen. But these decodable readers are what we use to practice all the skills that they were learning in their whole group and small group phonics instruction, but it was more authentic.
I want to interject right here, Gina, because the importance of decodable readers, and your money's finite, your funds are finite. So as a building leader, you need to make decisions on where you're going to align your funds. And this is a multi-year process, as Aaron alluded to earlier. So, we relied on some resources that were readily available, but when we have this knowledge base, we could find items that we believed would fit what we're trying to do. And so in terms of decodable readers versus predictable text, huge game changer. Gina, I know you would agree.
Yep.
In terms of having these books that are predictable in nature, which do not foster what the teachers are putting so much effort in terms of building the phonological core, addressing phonics, and then you give them a predictable text that doesn't align and has vowel team patterns that aren't even appropriate for kindergarten. So that was a huge, huge piece in terms of the mindset shift. So I just wanted to be able to point that out.
And another change was not putting a book in their hands earlier in the year. That was something I used to feel so strongly about. The second I had gotten some of their sight words in, I would then hand them a guided reading book, level A, and teach them to use those animal strategies to figure out that last word that maybe they weren't ready for. So this was really hard. So we really didn't put a book in their hands until they had a really solid sight word from their high frequency words, until they became sight words. And then also until they could really start decoding CVC words. And so that was a shift as well. And like Ernie said, those level texts, I know at the end of the year in kindergarten, it would be we want to get them to a level D. Well, sometimes those level D books had those vowel teams in it that are not necessarily appropriate at the kindergarten level. Some of your kids are ready for that, but not all. So then the kids were really relying on some of those picture clues where it could be hurting them in the future. So now we're moving on to really the language comprehension part of the simple view of reading. So we were analyzing, okay, so maybe the decodable text that we're using, you can't dig deep and you can't really comprehend really well. I remember this book, Max, and it was like, Max is mad at the map. And I'd be like, oh, why is Max mad at the map? And we'd come up with reasons, oh, he got lost and things like that. But you can't dig too deep in some of these decodable readers, especially in kindergarten. But this is where you take your read aloud opportunity and you make the most of it for language comprehension. So something that Ernie brought to the table was he wanted to make sure when we were teaching vocabulary, oral vocabulary words, that we were using words that followed the tier 2 or tier 3. So tier 1 words are the words that the children, we almost assume they know. And you can never truly assume, but they're the words that we use in most everyday conversations. But those tier 2 and tier 3 words are the words that are a little bit that you don't always hear in everyday conversations. And tier 3 words often relate more to the content, specific words. So we created something in kindergarten, and actually it was another kindergarten teacher's idea of calling them sparkle words. And so we would take a word, we would look at the books that we were reading through our program. We went to our program first and we're like, okay, let's look at some of these read alouds. They didn't always have to be from the program, but we're like, let's take some of the oral vocabulary that we think needs to be taught. And let's include a visual. So what if the word was delicious? We would have like a picture of somebody eating ice cream and talk about the word delicious, introduce it as a sparkle word, and say, when we are reading the story today and you hear our sparkle word delicious, we are going to do our sparkle fingers. And it also sets the students up for, hey, I'm going to be expecting that you're paying attention because I want to see those sparkle words as we're reading. So that was a shift. Instead of just quickly going over vocabulary before or just doing that point of contact teaching, which is amazing to still do while you're reading, we were really front loading the story with these vocabulary words. And then we would do the point of contact when we came across it. We do our sparkle fingers and then possibly use some synonyms that go along with it. And sometimes if the word was a little bit more difficult, we would use semantic mapping tools to help them really connect their prior knowledge to this new term. And so that actually married very well with how we changed our comprehension focus. One of the things with some of the students in our schools are they might not come to us with a lot of background knowledge and a lot of experiences, so we can't assume that just picking up a book that they're going to know. So I have an example here. This is one of the books we would read called Atlantic, and it's by G. Brian Karras. So this story actually takes on personification. The Atlantic Ocean is actually telling the story. And it's a book that I remember reading before and following maybe our programs, you know, these are the questions they ask beforehand, here's what you do. And I realized it went way over their heads. Not only did the kids look bored while reading this story, they just didn't understand the content. So, you know, after learning all of this information this year, I went through and picked out some tier 3 words, such as gulfs and bays and tides, and just the Atlantic, and letting them understand that the Atlantic Ocean is one of our oceans, and bringing out that globe and showing them maps and showing them examples of the different waters and all of that. That made them excited. We pretended we were at the beach, closing our eyes, just trying to provide them with those visuals and those experiences really helped them connect to this story. So it's just one of those examples of how this kind of change, where I may have just fit this read aloud in quickly, it really did connect and build, and they have a better experience because of it.
I just want to interject here, Gina, that the background knowledge piece was one of our conversation points and its importance in terms of future reading comprehension. And if anyone's familiar with the baseball study in terms of reading comprehension success, you know what we're talking about in terms of the importance of background knowledge and looking at it again through the lens of the simple view, aligning with the language comprehension piece, an easy way to really impact a student's future reading success. So,
Quick questions, couple quick questions.
oh, yes, we love them.
You mentioned the decodable books, and we were curious about which ones those were and where you got them.
Ernie, you want to talk that?
Yeah, so we the ones that you saw in the picture, is I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, because those were ones that I want to say reading A to Z.
Those actually, I think I personally purchased myself off of like a teachers pay teachers, you know, for my students to use. Yes.
So, and we are now, you might be thinking, oh my goodness, teachers pay teachers. There's a lot of good stuff on there. But when you look at it through the lens of an understanding of what to look for, when you're making informed decisions, like again, as a building leader, you need to kind of be like, okay, what can we use now until we get what we really need? And so the conversation's already started. We purchased geodes through Great Minds, which partners well with the foundations for grades 1 and 2. And we made the decision that, okay, well, we can't do it this year, so this is what we're relying on for kindergarten, but the conversation's already started with Gina and the team and I in terms of what we're using what we're going to purchase this year through our building budget. And again, for the building leaders out there, this is a multi-year process. What are the things that you should, what are the things you can address now? And then in year 2 and year 3, as this shift continues to happen. You said there was another one, Wendy?
There is. They were questioning about the, if Heggerty and Foundations form your core, or do you have a core reading program that accompanies that? And then I have one more after that.
Yeah, we use, in our district, we have the Journeys program. So we do use that. But in terms of building the skill set, we rely on Heggerty for phonological awareness, Foundations for phonics. Journeys provides us with what it provides us. And I'll leave it at that.
Good, thank you. And one more was what programs you use in grade 3 and above. Do you continue with this work?
So Heggerty's K-2 in our building. And in terms of Foundations, we are looking to start the shift into 3rd grade. That's the conversation as a district that we're having. And, but we still rely on Journeys in grades 3 on up. But as I said, change happens. There's a certain speed to it, especially when money's finite and you have to really pick and choose. And we're looking at systemic change in terms of impacting grades 3, 4, 5's reading ability. You start at the K1-2 level.
Very good, thank you.
Yep.
And just one more thing, as far as decodables, there are some good resources on reading A to Z,
Yep.
and we've also used really great reading for those resources.
Absolutely.
Good. So just for a time check, we are down to 10 minutes.
Perfect.
Okay.
How many minutes we have left?
I am going to quickly go through this slide then, just in the spirit of time, but this is more from a reading specialist lens. This was how do we take action as a team. I am fortunate to work on a very strong reading specialist team with a lot of knowledge and you know, a lot of the things that we were hoping to move towards in the classroom, we had the benefit of already doing some of those things, certainly not all of them, but some of them in our small group. And that comes with the role. I'm not trying to say that, you know, we're more knowledgeable than anyone. We just have the availability to go to trainings and look at some resources that are a little bit more geared towards our tier 2 and tier 3 students. My aha moment as a reading specialist.
Oh,
Am I okay?
you're good now. Yep.
Something popped up. I don't know what happened. Sorry, everyone. My aha moment as a reading specialist actually happened during a Penn Literacy Network course that I was taking, where I was having actually a group of the reading specialists were having a conversation with the instructor, and she was asking us how we align what we're doing in our tier 3 groups with what's happening in the classroom as to not overwhelm our struggling readers. And I was kind of stumped because there wasn't a lot of collaboration. Number one, anyone who is a classroom teacher knows how overwhelming that can be. So as to not overwhelm the classroom teacher, we were almost looking at it as like, okay, here we go. We'll take a little bit of this to take it off your plate. And her comment made me realize that perhaps that wasn't the correct approach, that there should be a lot more consistency for those younger readers, or for those struggling readers, excuse me. So while we may have been doing some of the strategies that Gina was just talking about are now happening in the tier 1 classrooms, like rapid naming and using assessment to drive our instruction and spending time on phonemic awareness and being systematic and explicit with our phonics instruction. Now we're able to align that to what's happening in not only the whole group, but more specifically in their small groups, because we're all looking at past results and we know where these students are struggling in their phonemic awareness sub-skills. and we're able to focus on that as a team. So these kiddos are feeling like they're going from their whole group that might feel a little bit ahead of where they are, to their small group with their teacher that's supporting them, and then to us as the reading specialist team, where we're really trying to drive those skills in an even more explicit way. So that was a major, major strength that came out of this for our students who really needed this strength to come about, was this consistency from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. The language is the same, the skills are the same, and we're growing them as readers instead of having these little islands of really great things going on, but these islands might not have felt connected for those readers.
And then this happened. And we had a lot of momentum, and we were definitely making gains, seeing progress, and then COVID-19 happened, right? And so initially it was a short-term closure. We were simply focusing on review and no new instruction. But then the realization is that it became a long-term closure, and the conversation shifted. Well, we can't simply review for the next 2.5 months. So what are we going to do, and how are we going to do it in terms of new learning? And that question came back to me and quite often, but when you look at it through this lens of the simple view of reading, it was so simple. It was, again, so easy to really make those determinations on what we had to focus on. And it wasn't simply the next unit in Journeys. That's not what it was. And to be quite honest, I'm not even sure if we relied on Journeys at all. But what we considered was, what can we take from the magic of the 6-hour school day and condense it into 1 to 2 hours, considering things like working parents, the independence of students, technology needs, workload, and also just the overall concern of the pandemic. But when you're looking at it through the lens of the simple view, it was very clear that, and I'm going quickly through these because I want to make sure we get through it. Looking at it through the primary lens, we met as a leadership team, the kindergarten, Gina, first grade team leader, second grade team leader. We're going to focus on Heggerty. We're going to focus on phonics, continue to build background knowledge, provide fluency practice when appropriate, and continue with the orthographic mapping piece in terms of connecting the phonemes to the graphemes. And we also spoke about asynchronous versus synchronous and taking more of a blended approach. You know, when you think about synchronous learning, there's an equity piece to that, to require kids to log in and sign on at a certain time for a certain lesson, and possibly hold that against them would not be equitable. But we also understood that the asynchronous piece, there's research to support it, and also in its delivery, we spoke about that, and led professional development with the teachers in terms of, if we're making screencastifys or screencast-o-matics, how long should the video be? You know, in terms of keeping student engagement, a 6-minute video is an ideal length. Anything between 6 and 9, you're still in the 90% of student engagement. Anything more than 9 minutes, you drop down to 50% engagement. And so we spoke about that. How can we make it engaging during the videos? What visuals are we using? And that personal touch, which is so crucial. There's such great content out there available from experts, but our boys and girls want to hear from us. They want to hear from the teachers. They want to hear from the people and the adults that they know and love and trust. And during these distance learning times, that's what matters. And then for our synchronous piece, and Aaron, you were heavily involved in this, providing, when appropriate and when we could, when time and intervention and some levels of remediation when needed and when appropriate. And I can tell you that the teachers, which I'm sure many teachers have, this wasn't just within the hours of the school day. This was at 5 o'clock. This was at 6 o'clock. I live with a teacher. She was doing it at 7 o'clock. And so it's whenever it was possible to get this in. And I just want to really give some shine to our kindergarten team, because they did a phenomenal job of putting something together. And Gina, if you want to, this is us wrapping it up in terms of the.
So what we did, and like I said, I work with the most amazing team. This is what we decided to do, is we wanted to provide those videos for that asynchronous learning piece, but we wanted to include, so if you can just hover over you can see like that showed me teaching the Haggerty lessons. So I took on the Haggerty lessons for the week. A colleague of mine took on foundations. And so he taught our foundations lesson. Another teacher did the read aloud link where she was introducing those sparkle words and building the background knowledge and linking it to writing when we could. Another teacher worked on, we call it sight word practice, but our high frequency words. And there was a fluency piece in there where we were learning them. The kids were learning them in phrases and practicing. So we had all of that in a 2-hour, along with also some of the other subjects that we need to get in. And we lucked out, one of our teachers also has a student in our grade as well. So we would always test run and be like, okay, is this under the 2-hour mark? Make sure we're okay. But we felt so great having this opportunity for parents not to be the teachers. They can give the students the videos for the instruction, and the parents were there to just support when needed.
Yeah, and the teachers did a wonderful job collaborating, divvying up the amount of content that we wanted to address, and I can guarantee you that our parents were very happy, loved the personal touch, the engagement piece, and that's what we were doing in terms of trying to make a challenging situation with these uncertain times a little bit more comfortable for everyone involved, the parents and the students and the teachers. So that's it. With a minute to spare, Wendy.
Thank you so very much. How informational. It's just wonderful. So they can find you at...
We're big on the Twitter, so you can definitely find us over there. And there are 3 Twitter handles, and you can always feel free to reach out to us. Again, we're in the Centennial School District. I see some friends from the Lehigh Valley that are in here, so that's awesome. And some friends from the Middlesex Elementary School that I've connected with, and that's great too. So just thank you everyone for joining us and listening to our journey.
Thank you so much. And Regina, would you be willing to share that last resource when we put it in our Schoology folder?
Absolutely.
Yes, everybody's asking for it. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Closing thoughts to all of you who attended this session. My sincere thanks for your passion around change and your ability to implement the science of reading. As you know, this session was recorded and will be available on the Patton YouTube channel in the near future within 4 weeks. The Patton Literacy team will also, drum roll please, be creating reports that align with these recorded presentations so that you can use them in your professional learning with families and educators.